Hello everyone, and welcome to our first online lecture. Today we are officially starting distance learning, and so this is the lecture for metaethics that I'm now recording for the lecture slides that were sent out previously. So today we're not going to go into the full hour-long detail about Podgman and Rovain because the details and nuances of their specific views aren't as important as the broader picture of what metaethics is and what the different options are, what the different views in metaethics are. So that's what's more important. That's a better use of your time. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So first things first, what is metaethics? Metaethics is the branch of ethics that asks not which moral claims are true and false, not should we give to charity, is lying ever okay, should you pull the lever in the trolley problem. Those are all what's called normative ethical questions. Those are questions about which of the moral claims we could make. Lying is wrong, lying is right. You should pull the lever in the trolley case. You should not pull the lever in the trolley case. Those are all moral claims. Those are all claims about morality. Those are all normative questions that in metaethics we shove to the side. In metaethics, we're not concerned with which moral claims are true. We're concerned with what makes moral claims true. Are moral claims true or false? Are they the kinds of things that can be true or false? What does it mean when we say lying is wrong? What are we really saying? Are we just saying, I don't like lying? Or are we saying something objective like we do when we say that it's raining or that the earth is round? So whether moral claims are objective or if they're just matters of opinion or if they're relative to a society or if maybe morality is all an illusion, those are all metaethical views and answers to metaethical questions. Because metaethics asks, what makes moral claims true? Are moral claims true? Are there really moral truths? When we say lying is bad, what are we trying to say? What does it mean when we say lying is bad? So it's not asking whether or not lying is bad. It's asking what the statement lying is bad really means. And so metaethics, the core question is, what makes moral claims true? That's the core question in metaethics. And there are basically 4 different answers you can give to that question. 4 answers you can give to the question, what makes moral claims true? Answer 1 is nothing. Nothing makes moral claims true. Morality is an illusion. It's just a mistake we've made. All moral claims are false because there are no moral rules. There are no moral values. Nothing is good or bad, morally speaking. That's just a mistake. Morality is an error. There's really no such thing as morality. It's just an illusion. That's moral nihilism. It's the view that denies, nihilism denies, you can sort of see there's some sort of, I'm sure there's some Latin root in common there or something. Moral nihilists deny that there's any such thing as morality. They say nothing makes moral claims true because no moral claims are actually true. When we say lying is wrong, we're mistaken because it's not wrong because nothing's right or wrong. When we say giving to charity is good, we're mistaken. When we say you ought to give money to charity or that you ought to keep your promises, we are wrong. That's not true because there's nothing you ought to do. There are no moral rules that you can or can't follow. That's moral nihilism. That's option 1. Option 2 is to say opinions are what make moral claims true or false. And that view is called moral subjectivism. So moral subjectivism is the view that says morality is subjective. Morality is a matter of personal opinion. I might think lying is bad, and you might think lying is good, and neither of us is right or wrong. Neither of us is saying something true or something false. We're just expressing our opinion. We're expressing our personal feelings when we say lying is good or lying is bad, lying is right, lying is wrong. If I say you ought to keep your promises, all I'm saying is I feel good about keeping promises and I feel bad about breaking promises. In my opinion, what you should do is keep your promises. But I'm not saying anything more than that. I'm just expressing my own personal opinion. The way I am when I say that I like a song. If I say Mambo No. 5 by Lou Bega is good, I'm just saying that I like the song. I'm not saying anything more objective than that. I'm not saying anything more substantive than just, I like the song. If you say you think the song is bad, all right, we have a difference of opinion, but there's no further fact about which of us is correct and which of us is incorrect. It's just purely a matter of opinion. There's nothing more to it. So we can disagree without either of us being wrong or without either of us being right. That's moral subjectivism. Morality is just your own personal opinion. Contrast that with option 3, which is to answer the question, what makes moral claims true? And say it's society. Society is what makes moral claims true. So that option is called moral relativism. It's the view that morality is relative to a given society or culture. Some group of people in one time or place have set these as the things we value, and these are the rules we follow, and that's all there is to morality. It's a group of people in a society or a culture agreeing on certain values and on certain rules. And so moral relativism says that whatever your society or your culture accepts, that's what's right or wrong for your society. But if two societies disagree, if one society thinks that the death penalty is good and the other society thinks that the death penalty is bad, then that's just a difference in those societies. The death penalty really is morally good in this society and really is morally bad in this society over here. These two societies really do have different moral facts because morality is just relative to a given society or culture. So there's no fact about which of these societies is correct. One society thinks death penalty is good, another society thinks death penalty is bad, and that's all there is to it. There is no further fact about which society has it right, because whatever the society agrees on, that's what's right or wrong for that society. That's moral relativism. The idea that moral claims are true or false for a society, but not more broadly than that. So it's not just a matter of personal opinion. You personally can be wrong about morality. You can be wrong about whether the death penalty is good or bad, if your opinion goes against the broader agreement of the society you're in. Because morality is relative to a society as a whole, not to individual people. Moral subjectivism says society is a matter of your own personal opinion. It varies at the individual level. You can't be wrong about morality, according to moral subjectivism. You can be wrong about morality. You personally can be wrong about morality, according to moral relativism. A society as a whole can't be wrong, according to moral relativism, but an individual person can. That's moral relativism. The fourth and last option for answering the question, what makes moral claims true or false, is to say that the universe as a whole, reality itself, independent of us, independent of our opinions and our society or our societies, independent of any of that, there are real objective moral claims that are objectively true and apply to everybody, regardless of opinion, regardless of belief, regardless of society, regardless of time and place. Morality is real, mind-independent, part of the world, not based on personal opinion. That's moral realism. Moral realism is the view that morality is real and objective and universal and not relative to a society or to a person. So those are the four options. Moral nihilism says there's no such thing as morality. Moral subjectivism says morality is a matter of personal opinion. Moral relativism says morality is relative to a given society or culture. And moral realism says that morality is just a real fact of the world. It's independent of any of our beliefs or opinions, independent of what society you're a part of. It's just real out there in the world. And so when you make a moral claim, you're saying something objectively true, the way you are when you say it's raining, or the earth is round, or the sun rises in the east, etc. So, a bit more detail about these views. Let's start with moral nihilism. Moral nihilism is the view that says nothing is right or wrong. Nothing is morally good or morally bad. And so there's nothing that you're morally obligated to do. You're not obligated to give to charity. You're not obligated to save the drowning child when you walk by the lake. There's nothing you're obligated to do, and there's nothing you're morally forbidden from doing. It's not morally wrong to torture innocent people, because it's not morally wrong to do anything, according to moral nihilism. Nothing's morally wrong or morally right. And so one problem for moral nihilism, or what has been raised as a problem for moral nihilism, is that it looks like you're going to have to say things like the Nazis did nothing wrong is true. And that's not a sentence you want to say is true. If you are in a position where you're saying, yeah, the Nazis did nothing wrong, that's probably a bad sign for the view, generally speaking. Now, moral nihilists pushed back and said, yeah, we technically have to say that that's true, but it doesn't mean what it sounds like it means. We're not saying the Nazis were good, because nothing's good. But many people have a very strong intuition, a strong belief that what the Nazis did really was wrong, and that giving that belief up is a problem. And it's a problem for the view. It's a problem for moral nihilism, that you have to give up your belief that the Nazis really did do something wrong, that what the Nazis did was morally wrong. And it's not just Nazis. Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer cannibal, Ted Bundy, the other serial killer, pick whatever atrocity or horrible thing you want to use as an example. Moral nihilism is going to have to say that there was nothing wrong there, when it seems like clearly there is something wrong there. And so a common objection to moral nihilism is that it just seems wrong to say that there's nothing wrong with these horrible, horrible things. Another problem for the view that gets raised sometimes is that we talk in terms of good and bad and right and wrong and should, ought, can, can't type of language all of the time. And if you're a moral nihilist, then you have to say that all of those statements are technically false. Anytime you say lying is wrong, that's technically false. Anytime you say you should give to charity more, that's false. All those statements are false according to moral nihilism. But it's very hard to give up this sort of moralized language. It's hard to stop talking in terms of moral claims, like what you should do, what you shouldn't do, what you can do, what you can't do, what's right, what's wrong. It's hard to stop talking like that. It's hard to stop talking in those terms. And so some people have argued that given how hard it is to give up that way of talking, it might not be really possible to believe moral nihilism deep down. Because if you can't stop talking in terms of morality, if you keep saying things like you should do this, you can't do that, that's wrong, that's right, if you keep talking in those terms, on some level, sounds like you believe that morality is real. You believe that these claims are true. Otherwise, why would you make them? So, if you can't stop talking in terms of morality, then you can't really be a moral nihilist. You can't, even if you want to be a moral nihilist, you can't really believe it if you can't stop talking in terms of morality. Or so people have argued. I'm not trying to put my thumb on the scale and push anyone in any direction, but that's one issue that has been raised, that you can't really be a nihilist if you keep using moral terms, and basically you're not going to be able to give up using moral terms, which means you're not going to be able to be a nihilist. So we should ignore the view because it's not really on the table for us. That's one argument. So those are just some problems for moral nihilism. Next view up is moral subjectivism. And moral subjectivism, remember, is the view that says morality is subjective. It's a matter of personal opinion. It's like saying that you like a movie or you like a TV show. When you say that a movie, let's say Fast and Furious, if you say that movie is bad, seems like what you really mean is that I don't like that movie. If you say the movie's good, what you're really saying is that you like the movie. It seems like all there is to whether movies are good or bad is a matter of personal opinion. It's just a personal opinion. There's no real fact of the matter there that you can be right or wrong about. And so moral subjectivism says that morality is like that. When you say lying is wrong, all you're really saying is, I don't like lying. When you say torturing innocent people is bad, what you're saying is, I don't like torturing innocent people. I don't like when others torture innocent people. In my opinion, that seems bad. And that's all there is to it. But this means that when you make moral claims, when you say things like lying is bad, torturing innocent people is wrong, that doesn't apply to anyone else. If someone says, I like torturing innocent people, I think it's fun, I don't see anything wrong with it, I like it, I'm going to do it, I'm going to torture innocent people all the time. Looks like that person just has a different opinion than you. There's no sense in which that person is mistaken or that person is wrong. You might have the opinion that what they're doing is morally wrong, but they're not actually incorrect. They're not mistaken when it seems like they are. It seems like if someone says, I like torturing innocent people, I think it's good, it seems like they shouldn't think it's good. And so the one objection is sort of like the objection to nihilism. You're going to have to say that you and the Nazis have a difference of opinion, but that's all there is to it. It's just a difference of opinion. Neither one of you is better than the other. And that seems weird. That seems uncomfortable as a consequence of your view, if you were a moral subjectivist. But another objection is that if morality is just a matter of opinion, then it doesn't apply to other people. When you make moral claims, they don't apply to other people. They can't govern anyone else's actions because other people might have different opinions than you. And so this is something Rovain quotes Paul Boghossian as saying about moral relativism also, but it's especially true for moral subjectivism, or moral subjectivism is especially subject to this criticism, that if moral claims don't apply to other people, then it's not really morality that you're talking about. It's just a preference. It's your preference for what you would like other people to do. But there's no reason why your opinion should have any influence on what other people do. No one else seems to be subject to your personal opinions, which means that morality doesn't really exist anymore. There's no morality if it isn't applicable to other people and to other situations. And if you can't criticize someone else's actions for being morally wrong, then really all you're saying is, I don't like them. And so there's no morality left in this picture. That it's not really morality here. It's your preference for what you like to see people do and see people not do. And so the criticism is basically, it looks like moral subjectivism is going to end up being moral nihilism. You're going to end up having to say, really, there's no morality. Everyone just has their own personal opinions about what they prefer to see people do and not do. Because moral nihilists are going to say, yeah, sure, people have opinions. I prefer not to be tortured. Who doesn't? I prefer not to see other people get tortured also. That I have that preference. There's no morality about it. There's no ought statements that are true here, but I don't like people being tortured. So it looks like moral subjectivism and moral nihilism might end up getting to the same place. Moral subjectivism might, the term philosophers use is reduce down to moral nihilism. So all the problems of moral nihilism will then also be problems of moral subjectivism. And so that's an issue for moral subjectivism, is trying to explain why it's really different than moral nihilism. Because it's not clear, or some philosophers have argued, it's not clear that it is different than moral nihilism. Right? So that's moral subjectivism, a couple problems for the view. Now, moral realism. Let's move on to moral realism. Moral realism and moral relativism are kind of the good stuff. They're the really popular views that people actually hold and argue about all the time. So, moral realism is basically the view that moral rules are objective, universal truths that apply to everybody. So everyone is subject to the same moral rules, according to moral realism. Now, moral realism doesn't tell you what those rules are yet, but whatever the rules are, we're all subject to them, and we can be right or wrong, according to moral realism. And so in this way, moral realism differs from moral relativism or moral subjectivism in that moral realism allows for the possibility that everyone on earth is wrong about morality. So for example, let's pick just an obviously wrong thing. I assume that if anything is morally wrong, then slavery is morally wrong. But there was a time in the distant past when many people thought it was morally okay. Ancient Greece had it, the United States had it. It was a thing in the past. Lots of people at the time thought that it was morally, at least morally fine. They didn't think it was morally wrong or morally reprehensible the way we all recognize it to be today. If you're a moral subjectivist or a moral relativist, it looks like, well, if the society as a whole thinks that slavery is fine, then slavery's fine. If society as a whole thinks it's good, then it's good. And that's all there is to it. But moral realism, so according to moral realism, moral truths are objective and universal and mind independent, meaning that they are true regardless of our beliefs, our opinions, our society's beliefs, society's opinions. On the moral realist picture, it could be that every single person on earth is mistaken about what's morally right. Let's suppose that some point in the people in the past had different moral views. They thought all sorts of terrible things, witch burnings, misogyny, slavery, all sorts of terrible things were morally okay in the past. So let's suppose at some point in the past, everyone on earth thought that, let's say, torturing innocent people was good. I don't think there's any point in history where that's true, but let's say somewhere at some point in time, everyone on earth thought torturing innocent people was good, morally good. Moral realism says that they were all wrong. Those people were all mistaken. They got the facts about morality wrong. All of them, every single one of them. And that's different than moral subjectivism or moral relativism, because moral subjectivism says they all had this opinion, so that was right for those individual people. Moral relativism says that's what their society had agreed to. Torturing innocent people was good, so that was true for that society. Both moral subjectivism and moral relativism are going to have to say that the claim torturing innocent people is good is true for those people, for that society, whatever. Whereas moral realism can say no. At that time, everyone on earth was wrong about morality, because morality is completely independent of our beliefs and opinions on the moral realist picture. And so moral truths, moral rules are real, objective things that are in the world somehow that apply to everybody regardless of time and place. Right? So one problem for this view is these moral rules or moral values that are just in the world seem weird relative to the other things in the world. I mean, moral rules don't have electric charge, they don't have mass, they don't seem to be located in time and space. You can't like go out in the world and touch the rule that lying is wrong. They're different than everything else in the world, it seems like. There are these sort of magic rules in the sky that are somehow part of the universe, but are seemingly unlike every other aspect of the universe. They aren't physical things. They aren't minds, because moral rules don't make decisions or anything. They're not minds the way that people are, and probably animals are. And if you believe in God, God probably is a mind or has a mind or something, makes decisions. But moral rules are none of those things. They're not physical things located in space and time. They're not minds that make decisions. They are these objective moral rules built into the universe, but they're not rules like the laws of physics are rules, because the laws of physics cannot be broken. Moral rules, as I'm sure you all know, can in fact be broken. People can do morally wrong things. So they're rules, but they're breakable rules, unlike the laws of physics and chemistry and things that are unbreakable rules. So there are these breakable rules with this sort of inherent value, that some things are good and have a positive value, and some things are bad and have a negative value. And that's just out there in the world. And that's maybe a little odd, that they're completely different than anything else in the world, these moral rules or moral values. And so some people have said that that's a problem for moral realism. Another problem for moral realism that some people have raised is that it's hard to explain how we come to know what these moral truths are. If they're mind independent, but not sort of physical, then it's not clear how we know about them. Because like the sun rises in the east, that is an objective, mind-independent truth. If there were no minds, if there were no people, the sun would still do the same thing. It's clear to understand sort of why the sun rising in the east is a mind-independent thing, a mind-independent fact. It would be true even if there were no people. And it's clear how we know that. We wake up, we watch the sun rise, it rises in the east. We see it. Light from the sun hits our eyes, and then we form a mental image. You can give a whole physics and neuroscience explanation for how we come to find out that the sun rises in the east. But it's not clear how you're going to explain the fact that we come to find out about moral truths. Moral truths aren't things you can see. They're not things you can touch. You can't see directly the moral goodness or badness of an action. You can infer, but it's not clear how that inference works. A philosopher named David Hume, Scottish philosopher, 1700s, called this the is-ought problem, and said that seeing what is the case can never tell you what ought to be the case. Knowing what is true doesn't tell you what should be true. Seeing what does happen can't tell you what should happen. And moral knowledge is fundamentally knowledge about what should happen, what ought to happen, what should be the case, what should occur. But seeing what does occur, what does happen in the world, doesn't directly tell you what should happen in the world. And morality, moral truths, are going to be truths about what should happen in the world. And so how we come to form this moral knowledge, how we come to learn what's morally right and wrong, is going to be hard to explain. Now, sure, we're all taught by parents, teachers, etc., that you shouldn't do some things and you should do other things. But then where did they learn it? They learned it from other people, and so you're going to have this regress. So even if you can explain where you personally learned morality from, there's going to be a bigger question about where humanity as a whole learned morality from. And you might have a religious answer to that, and that's the next lecture we're going to talk about. We'll talk about that later. But just this is something that moral realists are going to have to answer. that moral relativists and moral subjectivists are not going to have to answer. Because moral relativists and moral subjectivists can just say, well, it's your opinion. Of course you know what your opinion is. Or look around, find out what the society accepts, ask people in the society, look at their sort of what they write, what they say, what they do, and that'll tell you what the society thinks is right, what the society thinks is wrong. That's all there is to it. So finding moral knowledge, learning moral truths is going to be a lot easier on the moral subjectivism or moral relativism pictures of morality than on the moral realism picture of morality. So this is a difficulty that moral realists have to deal with. And so those are sort of some problems that moral realism is going to have to face. So the last one I want to talk about is moral relativism. Moral relativism, like I said before, moral relativism is the view that moral claims are only true or false relative to a specific society or culture or time and place, a group of people that come together and agree that these are the rules we're going to follow, these are the values that we're going to have, these are the things we're going to take to be good and the things we're going to take to be bad. That's what makes moral claims true or false. And so moral claims apply to a given society. They don't apply outside of that society. They just apply in this one society. So when two different societies disagree about morality, they aren't really disagreeing. Each society is correct relative to their own morality, but it's just a cultural difference, right? And this is, if you read the Podgman reading, or if you read my lecture notes I sent out for the Podgman reading, Podgman thinks that cultural relativism is how we ended up with moral relativism. We, after hundreds of years of people thinking their society was superior to others, colonialism and all that, after hundreds of years of that, Podgman thinks we finally figured out that no culture is better than any other. And he thinks that's good that we figured that out. That's correct. No culture is better than any other. Cultural relativism is true. But Podgman thinks we've then made a mistake. He thinks that we've made a mistake because we saw that sometimes different cultures, different societies disagree about morality. And so we've said, oh, moral disagreements, moral differences in moral views vary according to culture. No culture is better than any other, so no morality is better than any other. Moral beliefs are culturally specific. And Podgman thinks that's a mistake. We can stop that inference. We can accept cultural relativism and say no culture is better than any other, and still think that there are objective moral truths that we are all subject to. That's Podgman's view. But Podgman thinks moral relativism is false. And he thinks it's false for a variety of reasons. And they're all sort of known issues for moral relativism. So one issue for moral relativism is similar to the moral nihilism issue about saying the Nazis did nothing wrong. Moral relativism is going to have to say that the Nazis or the United States under racist Jim Crow laws, or like 15th century colonizers who did terrible, terrible things, that they were all morally right relative to their own societies. So the moral relativist is going to have to say that the Nazis just had a different society. They had a different culture than we do. Their culture made mass murder good, or took mass murder to be good. Our culture doesn't do that. Our society doesn't do that. And just like saying that the Nazis did nothing wrong on the moral nihilist picture feels wrong, saying the Nazis just had a different culture than us, but their culture is not better or worse than ours. The Nazis were just a different society. They're not better or worse than us. That doesn't seem correct. Or many people have argued that that seems wrong, and that having to say that is a problem for the view, that shows there's something wrong with the view that you end up saying that. we can still say that the Nazis and the US under Jim Crow laws were morally wrong relative to our present society, but that doesn't feel like enough to a lot of people. We would have to say that those people, the Nazis and the US under Jim Crow laws, didn't do anything wrong relative to their own societies. That it's just a social difference, a cultural difference between us and the Nazis, and that's it. When it seems like, no, we're morally right and the Nazis were morally wrong, that seems correct. But saying that seems to require moral realism. Or to put it another way, it looks like the moral relativist is going to have to say that the Nazis or the US under Jim Crow laws or the sort of slaughter colonizers perpetrated hundreds of years ago, that none of those were morally wrong at the time. That they would be wrong if they happened now, but they weren't wrong at the time. Because in the moral rules accepted by their society at that time, it was not morally wrong. It was not morally wrong according to those rules, according to that time and place. So we'll have to say that what they did wasn't wrong at the time. It would be wrong if they did it now, but it wasn't wrong then. And that doesn't seem right either. That seems like a hard pill to swallow. So our intuition that the Nazis really were wrong, morally wrong, seems to be something we would have to give up on the moral relativist picture. We would have to say that they were just a different society with different rules. For our society, what they did was wrong, but for their society, it wasn't. They're not better. Their society is not better than our society. It's just different. Nazi Germany and our society now, just different. Not better, not worse, different. That's not something most people are willing to accept, or not something many philosophers have been willing to accept. Another potential issue is the problem of moral progress, is the phrase philosophers use. So many societies have it. The way we normally think about it is that many societies improve their morality over time. They make moral progress. So, for example, up until 1865, the United States had slavery, and then up until the Civil Rights Movement, the United States had Jim Crow laws that were explicitly racist, and been slowly making progress on race-related moral issues. It looks like what has happened in the past several hundred years is the United States moving from morally bad beliefs, morally bad rules, and slowly getting rid of the morally bad rules to take on morally better rules, to thereby make moral progress, to improve the morality of the society slowly over time. That's what it looks like is happening, or that's how it seems, that the society's morality really is improving over time. But it looks like the moral relativist might have to say that 1700s United States and 2020 United States are just two different societies that are each correct on their own terms, that each have their own moralities, and that neither moral system is better than the other. So the pro-slavery past moral system of the 1700s and the anti-slavery moral system of the present, that those are just two different societies, two different places, two different times and places, two different cultures, and that neither is better than the other. When it seems like clearly the present is morally better than the past, because the present doesn't have slavery and the past does. Normally, we want to say that not slavery is better than slavery. But it looks like moral relativists might need to say that it's just two different societies with different moral rules and that neither is better than the other. And so it looks like the moral relativist is going to have to say that there's no such thing as moral progress. You can't make moral progress. You can change your moral views, you can change the moral rules that a society accepts, but you're not going to be making progress. They won't be improvements, because when you change society to accept different moral rules, then it's just a change. It's not an improvement. It doesn't get better, it doesn't get worse. It's just a neutral change. When it seems like, no, we really are making progress, that people worked very hard to make that progress. And the moral relativist, it looks like, is going to need to say that it's not actually progress. It's just a neutral change. So there's no such thing as moral progress. And this is related to another problem that moral relativists have to deal with, called the problem of moral reformers, where moral relativists, or moral relativism, says that morality is determined by society. So when an individual goes against the moral values and moral rules of a society, that person is morally wrong relative to that society. But abolitionists, people who fought against slavery in the slavery era of the United States, civil rights leaders who fought against Jim Crow laws and other explicitly racist laws in the 20th century. These are examples of moral reformers. These are people who went against the seemingly bad morality of their time and place, of their society, to reform and improve the morality of their society. But it looks like on the moral relativist picture, each society makes its own morality. These moral reformers are going against the morality of their society. So, relative to the morality of their society, they are morally bad people. That for their time and place, they were morally bad. And that doesn't sound right. That seems wrong. That seems like an error, a mistake. And so this is raised sometimes as an objection to moral relativism, because it seems obviously true to a lot of people that there is such a thing as being a moral reformer, being someone who goes against the bad morals of a society to improve the morality of the society, and that moral reformers are morally good people. But it looks like moral relativism would force us to say that any change in a society's morality is a neutral change, and anyone who goes against this morality of their society is bad, morally bad, relative to their society. So there's no such thing really as being a moral reformer. There's just being a bad person who initiates a neutral change in the moral rules a society accepts. And that seems implausible, or at least unpleasant at a minimum, to accept. We want to say Jeffrey Dahmer, the cannibal serial killer, went against the morality of his society. And let's say Martin Luther King Jr. also went against the morality of his society. But we want to say Jeffrey Dahmer was wrong, was morally bad. Martin Luther King was right and was morally good. But it looks like moral relativism might take away our ability to make that distinction. It's just individuals going against the morality of their society. Since no society's moral views are better than any other, there's no real way to distinguish or to explain why Jeffrey Dahmer was bad, but Martin Luther King Jr. was good. And that's, or at least critics of moral relativism have argued that on the moral relativist picture, there's no way to make this distinction. And that seems like a problem. You want to be able to make that distinction because it seems like that distinction really is there, right? But if moral relativism doesn't let you make that distinction, then so much the worse for moral relativism. All right. So that's just a couple problems for moral relativism. So those are a lot. If you read Rovein's paper and or the lecture notes I sent out on Rovein's paper, Rovein is trying to make a version of moral relativism that avoids these exact issues. And there's some debate about how successful she is. She obviously thinks she's successful, otherwise she wouldn't have published it. Other people think she's not as successful, and so it's still this is still a live issue. There's no settled view on this is the correct answer. Presumably there is a correct answer here. Either morality is objective or it's not. But there's no consensus yet on which answer is right. So that's all I want to say about moral relativism, moral realism, moral subjectivism, moral nihilism. So that's all I want to say about metaethics. If you have any questions, please let me know. Please send me an email or, well, I don't have office hours anymore. So please send me an email and I promise I will get back to you as soon as I can. And if you have any questions about the video or about the lecture slides or about the lecture notes, I will be more than happy to answer your questions. And stay safe out there.